Hey, so on this episode of the podcast, we had on Matt the broker from Michigan, and it was phenomenal. I mean, we talked about, our backgrounds before real estate investing. We kind of talked about what we're currently doing, some of the deals that we're analyzing right now, some of the ways that we're able to provide value to our students. Matt has experience in brokerage, and he's helped and he's coached people into buying properties, profitable rental properties. I've, from a tax perspective, have helped people as well, and we were just able to really bridge our connections and our network together and really put together something from you guys from a very not just a high level, but a more detailed perspective. We went into deal analysis, kind of things to look for, how to get properties appraised the way you want them to. So make sure you guys stay tuned. And again, reach out to Matt or me if you have any additional questions, and we'll see you guys in the episode. Hey guys, before we get into the episode today, I really want to shout out my Facebook group, Tax Strategies for Real Estate Investors. So we have over 5,000 real estate investors in this group from all walks of life. We have long-term rentals, multifamily, mid-term rentals, short-term rentals, commercial properties, syndications, and everything in between. We have people that are co-hosting in there. We have people that are property managing in there. So make sure to join today because we talk about all sorts of things between tax strategies and real estate management, portfolio management, and absolutely everything you can imagine. So if you have questions for me, this is the easiest way to get access to me is to join this group and ask your question. So without further ado, let's get into the episode. Hey guys, welcome back to the Learn Like a CPA show. Today we have a special guest, Matt. I originally met Matt actually in Las Vegas. I was speaking at a conference, STR Nation with Patrick Switek, and Matt and I connected, kind of chatted it up about what we have going on in real estate. And Matt's an awesome guy. He's from Michigan, and I'm gonna let him introduce himself.
Hey, thanks for the intro here, Ryan. So I'm Matt. I started off as a real estate broker, mortgage broker, and over the last 4 years, I got pretty heavy into Airbnb. Currently have 32 Airbnbs. We host for about 35 more. Under contract to buy 13 more right now. I have no arbitrage, no rented properties. Everything is owned. I'm a big on equity, and because of my background in mortgages and real estate, I've really got good at applying the Burr method to STRs. And that's been a huge win for us. In fact, today, Ryan, we just got back our appraisal on our 12 unit came in with $100,000 of extra value on that. We're actually gonna be looking at doing a raise for some partnership positions for equity. So yeah, if anybody's interested, feel free to reach out on that, but that's gonna be a fun topic to bring up later on.
How long after you were a mortgage broker was your background? How long after that did you buy your first investment?
Good question, because some people think it's overnight, right? I probably started in long terms 7 years ago. 7 years ago, and I actually just relaunched my first long term. I converted it to a short term probably 2-3 weeks ago. We've already had 5 bookings. So we're on our way. We're looking at our first month launched as profitable, so that's pretty exciting. But yeah, long term was our first thing. We started mortgages, got into real estate sales, then rentals, and 4 years ago, a buddy of mine said, "Hey, this Airbnb thing could really hit," and so I converted one of my duplexes into an Airbnb. And mind you, like Michigan we didn't have AirDNA, we didn't have data. I just had to go with conscious decision making. What would I do? How would I use this area? Is there other hotels, motels in the area? So I had to look beyond the data. The data was non-existent, right? So that's been a lot of my method. And now over the last 4 years, we have more data in Michigan. So a lot of the things that I felt and saw and could quantify are now actually being shown in the numbers. So we've been ahead of the market in a lot of ways, but I still think Michigan's got plenty of runway left.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's almost good for you though that the data is not as accessible, right? Because people aren't looking
100%.
to invest in Michigan. So I'm from southwest suburbs of Chicago, so we used to always go to South Haven, New Buffalo, St. Joseph for there used to be after parties for prom or homecoming or whatever. So I'm very familiar with the rental market there. I know they're very strict on regulations, but I mean, you don't hear anybody trying to go to Michigan. Everybody's Smokies, Destin, 30A. They want to own rentals, in more desirable markets, but everybody's sleeping on these Midwest markets. So I have the largest Airbnb on Lake Erie in Ohio, and kind of similar. You're not really seeing a lot of investors try to get here for short-term rentals.
How am I just now hearing about this, by the way? I wanted to see that link. Let me favorite it. I like to, by the way, if you all have, great Airbnbs, I'd love to see them. I like to save and heart them. It's also helpful for insights and getting the algorithm boosted. I'd love to help everybody out. But also, if I'm going to be in those states, I want to go stay at your places, check them out, give some feedback. But yeah, I'd love to do that, Ryan. But yeah, the Midwest has been slapped on, to your point. And a lot of people go, hey, I want to be in the Sun Belt states. And I'm kind of anti Sun Belt states. I like them. I have one in California. I have an 8-unit in California, a little boutique hotel. And it's done generally well. Coachella has been a great month. I think we did 40,000 in on that one. So that's going to be a good month for us. But that aside, I still love Michigan. It taught me, I have the right set of contractors, easy to deal with contractors. There's still a lot of like forced depreciation opportunities here. And the cash flows are great. So that's been great. I'm sure that's why you've probably kept your Lake Erie property, right?
Yeah.
So
so you said you have 35 that you own. How did you, because I'm sure you capped out at your 10 conventional loans. How did you scale to that?
yeah, just to clarify, it was 32.
32.
35 is on its way though. So a lot of people think that the finance cap is 10, and that's true for conventional lending. If you're using non-conventional DSCR, non-QM, you'll hear it said a lot of different ways, private money, you have no cap. So my recommendation to everybody that's really trying to get into scale, if you're looking to do 10 or more properties, definitely reach out to me. But if that's your goal, you need to figure out a product that is going to help you get there as fast as possible. So one of my big things is I use fix and flip financing. We get 90 to 100% financing on that through our brokerage. And because of that, we're always adding value. And then once the value is added, we do a cash out refinance also in a non-conventional mortgage. And from there, we're able to just continue to scale. We just keep recycling our capital, and that has made us move very quickly, right? So that's how we do that. Excellent question, man.
So that's something I want to get into later. I think we need to touch on a few things here. Let's talk a little bit about like how did your 2022 end, and what are some big life events that you had happen recently?
Both of us got those, huh? So 2022, that was the first year we broke $1 million in Airbnb gross. Nice. And it was very exciting for us. We were like, wow. We didn't expect to do that. But I guess, when we kind of like sat back and like, oh yeah, that is a number that's quantifiable based on how much we were doing per month. And so this year we may double that. It's looking really exciting because a lot of ours got up and running last year. Beyond that, that's when we took down the 8-unit hotel this year. I'll get into this year later. And I also found out I'm going to be having my first kid. It's going to be a baby girl due in August. So really looking forward to that. And how about you, man? What happened for you that was special in 2022?
Yeah, 2022, I'm just thinking about it. So I was at the time, that was 2022 was my first year of like full-time entrepreneurship. I'm not going to go into specifics, but I definitely say that the goal that I had of the amount of money that I wanted to make, I like doubled it and almost tripled that goal for 2022. And I never would have imagined, if you would have told me a year, 2 years ago, I'd be doing what I do now. I love what I do and I love helping people. I would have thought you were crazy that it could be achievable. But yeah, 2022 is my first year of full-time entrepreneurship. At the end of 2022, we were underwriting a $3.8 million ground-up construction at Branson that we're just now breaking ground on, and then also underwriting a $2.5 million RV park in Blackhawk, Colorado. The RV park we closed on in March, and so two big deals that I was underwriting at the end of 2022, and then in 2023, I'm kind of more focused on leaning in on the education and the consulting aspect of the business. So now being able to turn around and just amplify my reach. And that's actually one of the things that we just wrapped up the SDR Wealth Conference a few weeks ago from Nashville. And that was really my biggest takeaway, was the way my voice is being able to be amplified through social media and through the Facebook groups and through my podcast. Is I'm able to just touch and reach and help so many people that I never thought I could help. This guy, like, I kid you not, he came up to me in the bathroom, and it's just a really weird thing where like people meet you
That's
in the
the best
bathroom and
time
you're
to
like,
approach somebody on a conversation.
yeah, you're just
Hey,
like, do I shake
what?
their hand? Like, and this guy's like, he's like, dude, man, he's like, Ryan, he's like, you're Ryan, right? I was like, yeah. He's like, I listened to your podcast breaking down the difference between fixing and flipping and buying and holding and the tax implications of that. And he's like, because I listened to your podcast, I saved $22,000. And I joked with the guy. I was like, "Oh, okay. Where do I send the invoice to?" But it was just crazy to understand like the reach that I have. And so in 2023, I'm looking to kind of buy back some of my time, so I'm able to amplify and spread out my reach a lot further than I currently am. I currently have a $1 million property in Miami. It'll be my first property in Miami, and so we're going to close on that hopefully at the end of this month, if not early May. So that's kind of what I got going on. And I am engaged. I've been engaged. I actually got engaged in 2021, but I'm getting married this year in September. So a lot of
That's
life
awesome,
stuff to
man.
plan for. Yeah.
I think you sent me the Miami one. That looked really good. Nice
Yeah.
call. Nice call. And
So
the wedding, that'll be exciting. A lot of great stuff afoot. Congratulations, man. Really happy for you.
I think a lot of stuff happens, I think, when you focus all your time and energy on what you love to do. So the way I teach that, and this is what I talked about in Nashville, is like your genius zone, right? So the genius zone is what you believe that you have the gift and the skills, and God put you on this earth to do this specific thing. And for me, I feel like it's taking topics that are extremely complex and breaking them down into something that everyone can understand. And so the author of the book, The Genius Zone, talked about how people only spend 10% of their time, if that, in their genius zone, and 90% of the time elsewhere that's not in their genius zone. And if you could figure out how to flip that, so that way you're spending 90% of your time doing the things that you love, you're gonna get so much value out of that. You're gonna make so much more money, and you're just gonna be able to help so many more people along the way.
100%, man. And it's funny, kind of like going into, I guess what I'm doing also for 2023 is a lot of that. So I went to a good amount of conferences last year, just like you did. That's where I met you at a few of them, actually. I think STR Wealth and then STR Nation. Might have been something. Did you go to Rentalpreneur? I can't remember.
No, I did not.
Shout out TJ.
Yeah, shout out TJ.
Anyway, yeah, he did a great job. Really, really great. So did Patrick. I mean, Bill, Mike, all those guys. But when I met you, I was kind of realizing, for finding out things about myself I didn't know. I kind of started calling myself a groundhog. I felt like I'd been burrowing tunnels of Airbnbs for the last like handful of years. And I showed up to these conferences and people were like, how many Airbnbs do you have? And I thought I was going to be one of the guys that was smaller in the room. And then they're like, dude, why aren't you teaching? Why aren't you talking to us about this? I'm like, I didn't know I did good. I just thought you're supposed to go out there and just execute, right? I had no idea that was like a good number. So then I started like doing a lot of consulting last year. As a real estate broker, a lot of people wanted to buy in Michigan, so I helped set them up. And it was great. But the one-to-one just became a lot. And after a while, I said, I got to figure out some group coaching or something. So to your point, the Genius Zone, that's kind of what we've been doing this year. And, we're probably within 2 weeks of launching. I've been saying that a little bit too long lately, but the mini course got finished up pretty much today. And the main course is all written and mostly recorded. So it's coming out quick, but we're going to be teaching, the application of equity, understanding all the financial metrics, IRR, cash on cash, all that's going to be broken down into like digestible modules. And that's some of the stuff that you and I are going to be talking about, right? Like hopefully on the next podcast or something, talking about how you really apply cash on cash to a deal before and after you buy it and refi it, because those metrics change, right? Your net operating income goes down when you increase your mortgage expense, even though you got cash back, and understanding how that affects the cash on cash metric. And also your NOI is a big deal. If you go from $2,000 a month to $1,500, that's a 25% reduction, right? But maybe you got 40, 50 grand back out, and now you can go buy another property that's going to bring in another net 1,500 to 2,000. So that's how you get the scale going, right? And that's a lot of what I teach. I like to teach people, this is how you get to 10 or more properties. And that's kind of become the name of the game for me, like really emphasizing that with practical application, using my brokerage, because we have the properties, we have the lending, we have the construction company we launched this year. So depending on the area, we can even help with construction. So we're kind of like a done for you, or at least taught everything to you type of situation.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting, and that's my biggest point with people is your cash on cash can be so persuaded by just the financing that you get, right? If I'm coming in with 25% down, basically a turnkey property, my cash on cash is going to be a lot less than somebody who's, buying it with a 10% down secondary home loan, or,
Mhm.
somebody who is not putting as much cash in the deal. And that's something that I wanted to get into right off the bat, because I will say two things. The first thing is people are buying investment properties with really not understanding the numbers and getting the numbers to pencil out. There's like this guy just the other day who posted in a
Mhm.
Facebook group about how he's doing 4 new builds in a Florida market, and he's asking the Facebook group what are the gross revenues of these properties in the area. And I know my first thought was like, you haven't penciled
Got
in
to
a pro
reverse engineer
forma,
that. Yeah.
or you haven't at least had an idea. Now,
Hmm.
I always say to people this: I know where somebody is at, their knowledge and their expertise, by the questions that they ask. If you ask me a very sophisticated question when it comes to tax, I already know you're not at the top here. You're a little bit further down. But that to me is just like, how are you building and these are probably all, $800,000 $1 million plus builds. How are you building that many properties without at least having a good idea of a gross revenue figure? So I know there's the demand like that for the coaching, and because there's people that are using real estate to replace their 9 to 5 job, get out of their W-2 that they hate, spend more time with their family, but we have to be doing it the right way.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you say that. And I think that that's one of the reasons I really like your approach, Kenny Bedwell. We talk a good amount about like what is the net earnings. Like Kenny, I think this isn't really a secret, but I think his one of his metrics is he won't buy something unless it will net him at least $50,000 per year, right? Which
That
is
might be me. You might have heard that from me though too.
I might have heard that from you. Okay, I think Kenny has a similar vibe. I'm pretty sure,
Yeah.
but I've grown into that thought and theory. And if I can't do that, at least I can get like 95 to 100% of my money out of the deal once I do the refi, and I'm still netting a solid chunk, and I can go rinse, wash, repeat, right? So it's like I have some situations where if it's a burr play, I don't need it to be 50, but if I'm just holding it, it's got to be at least 50. If I just bought it with no option to add value. So I have a couple metrics in if then this situations. I know you understand what I'm saying because you have a financially driven mind, right? So and that's the thing. Like if we can impart that knowledge on more people, I think they'll do really well. I've seen a lot of people. I talk about get into arbitrage. Arbitrage is the fast way to get in without capital. But truth is, you don't always need a lot of capital to buy either. There's a lot of ways to do that if you have the right leverage mechanisms. Which I won't be bashful about. We definitely have that. That's why I've been building this, right? But if you have those things, you can get in with similar income. Like I actually did a study comparing an arbitrage that can make, I think it was 2,500 net versus buying a property that would bring in about 2,800 net. Because I don't know what you factor in a mortgage. The mortgage is usually less than the rental payment. So let's say it just makes another 300 extra, and you're buying it, let's say 250 for that range. Similar furnishing setup. The only difference is, let's say you had, for simple numbers, 25K more as a 10% down purchase, right? So that's the only big upfront cost differential. If you get a partner on that, you split that, that's 12 and a half a piece, right? That gets it a lot more palatable. Sometimes you can just find somebody that'll happily lend you 10, 20, 30,000 anyway. You just say, hey, I'll put you
Yeah.
on. Let me get 5% on the money, and that's private money, right? So there's a way you could finance this with zero money. And let's say once you refi it, I think my number was like 340, 370 for the ARV, the after repair value. Once you got that done, actually, I'm not going to use the refi example, but I'll end it with this. After 5 years of owning it, presuming the landlord on the arbitrage example said, hey, we're done, versus you got to sell it at a higher net after 5 years of owning it. Let's say you sold it and you had a 40K net versus zero net on the arbitrage, right? At that point, I think you make 31% more money on your cash for the same holding period. So you got to figure if you can do that 3 times at the same time, that's almost 100% more of your money, coming back, right? So it's like there's so much value to getting the equity and the cash flow value and the tax savings. We haven't even hit on the tax
Yeah, not
savings, right?
yet. We're saving that for the end.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Short and sweet. I think on the example, I think on $100,000 presumed earner, I'd say comfortably 15K would be saved, like between mortgage interest, tax, and all the other things. I'm like, if you do that 5 times over, it really starts to add up, especially once you get 10 units.
Yeah.
So,
What was it? Yeah, so I've been working on, so I have something in my tax academy program now that I call the global debt schedule. And basically what I have the students, people do, clients, they're going to list out all their property addresses, whether or not they own them in a partnership or maybe they're sole owner. But I want to know, who are they banking with? Who's their lender? How much capital or how much loans do they have with that lender? I want to know what their LTV is on that property. I need to know interest rate. I need to know maturity date. But what I'm looking at too I'm also factoring in DSCR in there. But what I'm looking at is the net equity of their property compared to the amount of net income after debt service that the property is generating. So, I talked to somebody last week where they have a $400,000 of equity in a property in Arizona. So they bought for like $250, things worth $650, $700 now. They have $400,000, actually more than $400,000, but they have $400,000 of equity in a property. And because it's a long-term rental, it's only making them $12,000 a year net after everything is paid off. And so it's like you would have to rent that property out for 40 years almost just to break even on the amount that you could sell it for. When I say reposition, right? Whether you sell it, you refinance, borrow against it, HELOC, 1031 into something new, that like I'm not seeing a lot of people making that analysis. So there's tons of people who have really appreciate properties, and especially like California, Arizona, Texas area, where they're literally losing money because not only is it 40 years, but that's not factoring in time value of money. That 14, 15 grand a year income stream that you're getting for 30 or 40 years decreases in value due to inflation every single year. And so I typically have a break-even point for a long-term rental for me is if you're, and again, this is not cash on cash. This is not payback period. This is the amount of net equity that you have in the property, which means what you could sell and walk away with, divided by your net income. For me, for long-term rentals, if that number there is more than like 13 or 15, I'm selling or I'm repositioning. For short-term rentals, it's like 6 or 7, just because understanding time value of money and the velocity of money, and that I could put that somewhere else and it could work harder for me, right? You're like man. Excited.
I never get to talk to anybody about these words. Usually it's just right. And to all the people that are probably going, what is velocity of money? What is time value of money? And it's funny. It wasn't until the last few years that I really realized that the 7 years of owning a portfolio, I'm like, wait a minute, I'm only making $800 a month on this rental, like net. And it's not bad, but I'm like, wait a minute, if I sold it right now, that's another 30 grand. If I switch that up, I just increase my taxable discounts, right? Like how much I can save my taxes. In addition to that, I'm going to probably triple my net cash flow by buying the right property, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm also going from usually a D or a C market, because most of my stuff was like, basically it was more or less C market, but I'm going to almost all A class level properties that have higher appreciation. And plus, I think even one thing I learned in your course, because you shared some of that stuff with me, thank you, was typically the more properties you have that are in that $300,000 to $500,000 range, you have maximum net write-offs, like taxable write-offs. It's like when you factor all of those things, like you actually do want to have higher value properties overall. And I think right now what's interesting is the $300,000 to $500,000 range from a market perspective is probably more attainable than people think, because that sub 250, 300 range, that's all first time home buyers. And a lot of them are still trying to gobble that market up. As a real estate broker, we've done thousands of deals, right? And I've seen a lot of that market is still getting highest and best offers. I had a listing last weekend. We got 6 offers over asking. And I was like, wow, that's incredible. But then I looked at it across the whole brokerage, and like, there was tons of highest and best offers all in that range. So, and like even on the 700 to 900, I'm starting to see more competition again, but I still think that 300 plus range, like you could still buy that at a discount if you can target properties that have, they need paint, they need floors, they need lighting, and you can negotiate a nice little discount on that, hopefully 20% or so. Buy that sucker up, and even if it comes back with a marginal gain in value, if you actually put that back on the market, people will gobble that up, because there's a lot of people that are trying to become second time home buyers right now, right? And they're looking for properties that are all fixed up because they're trying to protect their cash position. They'd rather finance it, even though the interest rates are terrible. And that's another thing. Like with you and I, we know how to finance properties even at the higher interest rates and still be profitable. And that's that's such a skill that a lot of people are underplaying, because a lot of people are going, oh my God, you can't buy now, interest rates, property values. But honestly, if you still find a way to reverse engineer the metrics, just like the guy you mentioned, the guy that's in Florida building the 4 properties, if he had approached from the gross income or likely net NOI perspective, figured out what he can spend on that before he builds, factored in the hold time of the project, and all still penciled out, that'd be so much smarter. And do not undersell your hold time on a project. Even setting it up is even like, I guess, as simple as an arbitrage. Like there's time to set that up. Some people take way too long on that, but hold time is a big factor. I promise you, especially
What
in
is
first
your, what is your, on a per single family home basis, what is your lowest net income property per month? And what is your highest cash flow? If you just give me
my lowest
single family home.
Probably 300 on one of my long terms. That's probably my lowest. I have 51 properties. I have 32 Airbnb.
Let's do Airbnbs. Lowest Airbnb. Yeah.
Lowest Airbnb is probably 800 to 1100 per month. It's one
highest
of my first ones. Highest net on average, not for like those outlier months that are kind of unfair to kind of share. I'd say probably 4,500 net per month on average on
4.5.
Actually, two of them. Yeah.
How much more time are you spending in the 4.5 one than the $1,000 a month one?
Oh, you know that answer, sir.
It's exactly my point, right? It's like
I see the setup.
It is just so crazy to think, and I think this comes back to like those limiting beliefs. We're walking through some. Her name's Jackie through our program right now, and she started off by buying like 3 $500,000 properties, and they're all netting the same amount, 30-40 grand a year, which is great. But then it's like, how do you scale to get out of your $300,000-$400,000 a year W-2? You're going to need 10 of those suckers to do that. Versus if she could have just started, maybe instead of a $500,000 property, she grabbed $1 million property that was pushing off $60,000-$70,000 NOI. It's going to be a similar amount of time. One roof instead of 2 roofs, right? One cleaner instead of 2, and so it just really puts things into perspective. Now, this is not to say that people should just make that jump right into that big property, but understand good financial sense to be able to make that decision. Because the one person that came up to me at the conference, he's like, "What's the biggest jump that you ever made?" And I said, "Well, I went from a $400,000 purchase price to a $2.5 million purchase price." And he's like, "Well, how did you get the confidence?" And I said, well, once you understand numbers and you understand that it's a similar amount of time, to talk with banks, lenders, to do a bigger deal than it is a smaller deal, it kind of broadens your horizon a little bit.
You nailed that, man. You absolutely nailed that. And it's funny because even one of my best deals on paper, percentage-wise, ever was I had a long-term we bought for 45. We Airbnb'd it for a year, and then the city got kind of crappy, so we were just like, I'm sick of dealing with it. And in general, the neighbors weren't that helpful, so I said, I'm going to sell this and level up into a nicer area that didn't have the same kind of restrictions. We sold it for, I think it was like 160. So we had over $100,000 profit on it, and that's proof of appreciation, right? It was only like 3-4 year hold, so that's a really good equity play on that one for as little as we spent. But now it's like with some of the properties we have, here's one thing people don't talk about, but also it's hard to quantify. When you have an Airbnb set up as nicely as some of us do, when you really and this is shout out to one of my partners, Sarah Glidewell from the Carwells with Emily. Great job. We have some properties that you design them so nicely that when you actually do the refi for the appraisal, it's off the charts. Because why? You walked into a glum when you bought it. It was usually vacant or kind of run down when you bought it or whatever, right? There's nothing attractive in calling to you. But sometimes with the right designing and furnishing, you walk in, you just have a completely different experience. You can actually influence emotionally the appraiser to go, oh my God, there's nothing this grand, this wonderful here. And so whenever he has a chance, he or she has a chance to go up or down on a level when they're teetering on a comp that, a comparable, they're probably going to go up on that, right? And so that's what happens. Like I'm actually starting to see where design and furnishing is actually impacting the property value more than just the rehab expenditure. Hopefully that was consumable.
Yeah, like a good, better, best, how the appraisers have, or, fair, average, good.
Exactly.
So let's talk, because that's actually something I wanted to get into is like how people are appraising these single family homes, short-term rentals. So are you typically seeing, because I know on this one particular deal that I was trying to do in Orlando, we were going to buy the property. So we had two options, right? So we could either buy the property and come in with let's say $200,000 of staging costs and furniture that we needed. So we're going to buy $1 million, 11 bedroom short-term rental in Orlando, right? We could buy the $1 million property and then spend 200 grand out of our own cash to stage it and get it set up, or we could get the developer of the property to put the furniture in there for us, and then for us to come and buy the property at 1.3 or 1.2, and then we're essentially lumping the cash outlay into the loan balance. So that furniture cost, instead of having to pay it up front, 250 grand out of my pocket, I'm able to lump that into the loan and amortize that. And typically, like the types of deals I do are DSCR, so it's typically like a 5-year ARM that rolls into a 30-year AM afterwards. But the problem with that we found was that the bank, the way that they were appraising it is they were doing it separately. So they were saying, hey, the property's worth $1 million here, but this $250,000 worth of furniture, because of it being a short-term rental, that the bank wasn't going to appraise that property at 1.3. They're going to appraise the property at 1.1 and then make us buy the furniture separate. So I was curious what you've seen.
So it's a perfect example. You went from $250,000 of cash expense. You took 100 off of it and converted it to loan, basically, right? Mm-hmm. And let's say you're doing 10% down. So that 100,000, you only paid 10,000 out of pocket for that 100,000. So that left 150 plus the 10, that's 160, right? Yeah. So like that saved a nice chunk of capital, right? Which also improved your cash on cash metrics. So do I see people do that? When able is the answer. Like, at the end of the day, just to your point, right? You needed to have the value come in at 1.25 or 3, right? For it to have worked. And same thing on some of the properties we bought a couple properties probably 2 months ago we're rehabbing right now. And when we try to build in a little bit of furnishing budget just with all the rehab costs and everything. And I guess it's when we bought it, it was like 220, 230 averages, but the ARVs are like 440. So based on just what those numbers are alone, it should be very rehabbable, very burrable, sorry. And when we do that refi, we're going to be able to cover a good chunk of our, if not all, of our furnishing costs. And that's because we're creating new bedrooms, we're creating new living areas, we're adding jacuzzis, EV chargers. These houses are going to be like next level, modern day. Like, what the hell? This does not exist here in our cities, right? So by doing that, I think that we're going to set some market premiums. And the thing is, on any property where we're like, hey, you know what? We didn't get the value we wanted out of it, and now we don't want to hold it as much, we just sell it. We just flip it.
I was going to ask you that. Do you have a spreadsheet that kind of calculates that too, where it's like, is there a certain metric that you look at? Kind of how I was using. Because I use the net equity of the property, right? So fair market value minus outstanding loan balance, divide that by what I think the property will net after debt service. So if the property is going to, make 30 grand a year and I got $300,000 of equity in it, that's a 10-year basically break even. To me, that's too long. I'm going to sell that, or I'm going to get rid of that, or reposition somehow.
I haven't done it with that approach. That's a really smart approach, though. I like.
How do you do it?
Let's say in order for us to hold it, we're going to have like, I guess we are kind of doing that. If I have more than 10% of my money still tied into the value of the property, stuck in there, then I start to consider it. And if I just love the house, I know it's going to be like a nice cash flowing property, and it's going to make like, it depends on where my buying bracket is, I guess, on the actual deal. But generally speaking, when you do a refi appraisal, right, they can only use past sales comparables, right? And they have no idea of what the current market demand is. Because why? You don't have a buyer. That's the biggest difference. That's what a lot of people get confused on. Like sometimes you go, I know this home is worth this. It is on the open market, but it's not from a refi perspective. But if you have somebody that goes and offers, let's say you have a property, the 1.2 or 1.1 you have, right? The Orlando deal you were talking about. And let's say refi comps are at like, you're getting 1.1. That's where you're at. Then you're kind of stuck. Now, if you know that everything in the market is being, all the new active inventory is showing at 1.3, 1.5, and there's nothing for sale on the 1.1, you know that obviously presuming you're, similar build and all that, similar finish to the 1.3, 1.5s on the active market, there's a good chance you'll probably get that value, right? Yeah. So if you can clear $200,000-$300,000 for possibly, then maybe that's when you want to approach that. And that's the thing. Like sometimes, just if I'm not really sure what the market's doing before I'm doing a refi, like I might put a property on the market and just see what happens. Like if I get some crazy asinine offer because there's such little supply and such massive demand, that might make my decision up for me. Like on the property I was telling you about, if we get north of 450 on when we go to list it, we're just going to sell it. It's going to be too nice of an equity like win where we can go and now reinvest that into some nice bigger multifamily and lakefront property we've been wanting to take down. But if it comes in a little shy, but we still have like nearly a full BRRRR, we'll probably just keep it. But again, it's like without knowing the marketing element of what the buyers are who are out there and ready to buy, you don't have a full perspective. And that's where you're going to see those differences between the refi appraisal versus the purchase appraisal. Sorry, I know they got a little off topic.
No, that makes a lot of sense though. I didn't really think about it like that, but it's actually a really good segue into what I wanted to talk about earlier is when it comes to determining what you could sell your property for. So this guy actually yesterday, or it was last night, he posted in the Build Short-Term Rental Wealth Facebook group, 25,000 people in there. You go in there. I'm an admin. Shoot me a message. I'll approve you right away. If I don't like you, I'm gonna decline you. But he posted in the group. He's like, hey, I got this short-term rental, single-family home. I don't know how many bedrooms, but it was in like Door County, Wisconsin, that I've never heard of before. And he's like, it's generating $92,000 a year NOI, net operating income. That's what he said. Now, I need to make sure that people think NOI means the same thing as me, because when I hear net operating income, that can mean a few different things. Could that be a net operating income before debt service, after debt service, right? Some people confuse that with like gross revenue and anyway. So he's like, hey, what is this going to appraise at? And there was a bunch of people in there commenting like, oh, so if I'm going to buy that, I'm going to say, oh, it'll generate me $90,000 a year for, let's just say I can generate $90,000 a year net income for 5 years. What am I willing to pay for a $90,000 a year cash flow stream, right? Well, I chimed in and I said, no, look, this is how they're going to appraise it. It's a single family home. It's zone residential. They're going to appraise that based on sales approach. They are going to look at reasonable comps in the area that just sold, similar bedroom count. They're not even going to factor in the idea that it was an Airbnb. Now, what a buyer is willing to pay for that and what the bank's willing to appraise it, or what the bank's going to appraise it for and a buyer's willing to pay are two different things. Now, that's if your buyer wants to come out of pocket for more money than the appraisal. But I guarantee that if you have a single-family home that's zone residential, it is going to be traded based off sales and not income approach.
So that's accurate, really 99% of the time. There's some properties that are zoned residential commercial, and sometimes you can actually get a commercial approach. But some banks, if you have enough data and they're willing to work, they're usually smaller credit unions and things like that. Sometimes they will actually approach it as a commercial valuation. But from a sale to person A to person B, you're absolutely right. And you're so right on the NOI factor, like whether or not it's factoring in the debt service, the mortgage payments, right? Like for me, I don't pitch, FYI to people, the reason they don't always factor in the mortgage service, the debt service, mortgage payment, is because not everybody's mortgage will be the same. That's the number one reason why they don't do that. Because is it a mortgage on 50% or 90% of the property? Is it, what interest rate did you get? What terms did you get? And that usually it's dependent on FICO scores,
Financing,
credit
yeah.
scores, financing. Yeah. So it could be a multitude of reasons why. And that's why they started to not, well, not started. They typically don't factor that in. Now, for my purposes, because I emphasize a big push on leverage, I always factor it in. So that's always what I'm doing. I factor in max LTV available for the property. That's what I do. But I'm usually also like basing on like a debt service ratio type of loan that's going to be contingent on the property being able to support itself. So like typically at that point, you know, your credit isn't a factor, but it's not as big of a factor as long as you have decent credit or better. So
Well, you bring up a good point because if he is able to find an investor that buys that property, the investor might choose a bank to fund that will value that property based off its income approach of what it could generate,
right.
discounted cash flows. But obviously, if he's finding, if the buyer is, they just want to own a single family home and it's a primary residence, they're going to get a traditional conventional mortgage or whatever. It's going to be based off sales approach. So, and that is the biggest takeaway. So I've been going to these I've been going to these local real estate meetups in Chicago. So it's funny enough as I traveled the country to do short-term rental meetings. So, anywhere Florida, Arizona, California, Texas, Nashville. I've been everywhere doing short-term rentals, but I just started going within the last year. I started going in my own backyard at these local Chicago meetups. And I normally don't really pay much attention to the fix and flip guys because I don't, I'm not in here to get rich quick. I'm more of a buy and hold person. But the one thing that I learned from this fix and flip meetup was that you have to understand buyer persona of who you're actually targeting that to. So this guy, he came up to the meetup. He's like, "Hey, I'm going to fix this 4-bedroom house in West Garfield. It's worth $230 now. I think it's going to be worth $320, $330 after I fix it up." And the guy, the presenter of the group is like, "That's great, but you have to understand that who in West Garfield, which is like one of the poorest neighborhoods in Chicago, who's affording a $350,000 loan?" And the guy's like, "Oh." Right? Because it really has to be an investor who has deep pockets, somebody that can be able to afford that house. You're not going to be able to get somebody who makes $30,000-$40,000 a year, even on an FHA loan, that's going to be able to afford that house. And so that's one of the things that I learned about, from what I've learned from the fix and flipping, is you really have to understand your buyer on the other end, and how that market changes. Right? If what is it? Every 1% the interest rate goes up, your property loses 10% of its value, and so you really have to understand who your buyer persona is, because if I pay $300,000 for a house and the interest rate ticks up 2%, what does that do to my home's value? Like, what somebody's willing to pay for that, or they'll get a loan on, I should say.
So there is truth in all of that, but there is an antagonist of truth too. So there's the other side of it, right? So like I've seen markets where the main city that's been the attraction hub, right? Houston, Chicago, Birmingham, Royal Oak for Michigan, I guess, like those, like the nice cities. What happens is the ancillary adjacent cities, they start to expand, they start to grow too, right? The values start to, because people go, I want to live here, but I can't afford it, so I'll go to the cheaper city just adjacent to it. So I'm not sure about the location. You said Scarsboro? Is that what you said?
West Garfield.
West Garfield, I'm sorry. So I'm not sure how approximate that is. And yes, probably the average, like to that one flipper's point, the average buyer in that market might not be down for it, but the person that wanted the adjacency to whatever is nice and closest to that, maybe they are willing to go to that new neighborhood and treat it like an up and coming. So I've seen that also be a factor. If the values there are damn close, then you could set new record comps, which would create the opportunity for the lending to be available, and then that city could explode.
Well, I use one of the property, like the property that I have in Ohio, for example. I paid 200,000 for it, put 20 grand in, and let's say it kicks off 40, 50 grand a year NOI. People are buying properties in the Smoky Mountains for 600,000-700,000 that are doing that same $50,000 NOI, right? So how is because if I go to sell that house, it's going to be valued based off the sales approach. I'm probably going to get $250,000 for that house, if at best. How do I pivot, and how do I somehow get a loan that's going to be based off the income approach of that property rather than the sales approach?
Consistently, I don't have an answer.
Oh,
Sometimes though, if you go to smaller banks, hyper local banks close to that property, they may be willing to value it, but you're going to have to make a pitch. I've only seen it happen a few, or heard of it happening a few times when you actually make a pitch for how this property has been producing. Usually they want to see like 2 years of data so they can see it's business. The business has been functional for that long. Then you might be able to make an argument that the commercial asset would be backed by X dollars. It might not be at, 80% LTV, maybe it's 70, 75, but it is possible. It's definitely possible, and they could take some kind of income approach at that point based on a cap rate, which we brought up earlier too, right? And cap rates for STRs and hotels get handled differently than long-term rentals. So that's another thing to keep in mind. God, I had one other thing I was going to tell you. I think one other takeaway from the flippers, which I never intended to be a flipper. Because I'm to your point, I'm a holder. Like I flip it and I hold it. And I'm seeing a lot of the people do the build to rent model now. If you have the money and the experience, that's a good route for sure. But in that, I think the biggest and fastest way to get to scale is to get into a habit of buying and creating assets. And at that point, like I can't imagine not being able to create this wealth. If I had to start over tomorrow, I know I could get right back here within a year or so. Like that's kind of the thing. And I'm sure even with your experience of where you are with your taxes and what the world needs and, becoming an entrepreneur in 2022, you probably have a new route to how you can create better success in short-term rentals in your tax business. I'm saying with me, my real estate sales and my real estate brokerage, my mortgage brokerage, my real rental holdings. Like you kind of learn those things. And if only we could impart all that data and knowledge into people that are looking to get ahead, because I don't know about you, but I didn't grow up with silver spoon. We grew up broke. Bad news bears, Detroit born and raised. Did not enjoy it.
Bad news Lions there. Yeah.
Bad news Lions for sure. Oh my God.
Do you want to get into some of the tax stuff before we wrap up?
Yeah, let's definitely get into tax stuff.
So, I mean, we've been chatting a lot about it, and so I tell people all the time, it's like I don't sell tax strategy, but I sell financial freedom, and the idea that I'm gonna allow people to get to their goals quicker, whatever they want to do in life, fast, because they're saving money in taxes. Whether it's even $10,000 a year, you get somebody that's making $150,000 a year, and they're able to save 10 grand a year. That's a lot. That's like 10% of their income. But even some of the bigger clients, I'm able to save them $50,000, $100,000 a year. That's just going to get them to their goal a lot quicker. So we've been doing tax strategies for full-time real estate professionals, whether you're in long-term, short-term rentals, commercial buildings. Recently kind of dove into a little bit into hotels and some assets, looked into like solar credits and other types of things. So what has been your experience so far? I mean, learning from me and other people.
Oh man. Well, I'll start with when I realized I had a tax problem. It was back when I was doing mortgages when I first got out of college, and I went from like 39,000 or something a year was my starting salary to like 260 in like a year and a half. So it was a major jump up for me. But then I saw an $80,000 tax like total by the end of the year, and I was like, "What is that?" And then I realized that's like almost probably just over a third of a year that I didn't work for myself in a way. I worked for I felt like I was working to give it away to something. And I was like, I'm happy to pay some taxes, but 80 grand, I'm not sure. A third of my year went to that of my total income is what I was looking at it like. And that's when I realized, okay, it's time to get my tax like game up. Right. So I started working with, accountants. I stopped messing around with like the little, no hate on. I use TurboTax. TurboTax has been good, but like there comes a point when, especially as you get into rentals and becoming more of an entrepreneur, you need a professional that understands those buckets of where you can like hedge some of your tax costs better. And you're obviously one of those people, right? Like understanding when you apply. Well, I won't get too deep in that. That's your neck of the woods, right? But my point here is, after realizing I needed to get deeper into self-employment, I started seeing I was saving probably $30,000 a year once I went fully self-employed. I think on my first good year, it was I made like 120 or something as a real estate agent, and I saw that I only paid 27 or so, 27. I was like, okay, that ain't bad. We're getting in a better direction now. Yeah, and then after this last year though, because I had so many Airbnbs and so much depreciation and so much rental loss from things being, ready but not quite ready. We didn't pay much at all last year. And honestly, I was like, wow. I went back to my council. I'm like, you can back all this? Like, this is good? And they're like, yep, I can back it. We're ready. I'm like, bring it on. I'm like, all right, well, cool. If that's good, then that's good. And it's like that, but that's where I think into to a value perspective, like some people freak out about paying an accountant 2 grand, 5 grand even. But if that accountant versus going to some kind of generic tax done for you place, even if you're paying them 10 times the amount, let's say you're going to your normal like little, uh, uh, small shop, or I can't think of the name. I don't want to blast these places. Some little small shop that does taxes. That's kind of like a franchise, right? I'm trying to say without saying it. Uh, and let's say you pay him $500 and you get all the generic discounts, right? And maybe it brought your adjusted gross, well, your taxable income down to like 22% or something. Well, and maybe that ended up being 20 grand. So $500, you save 20 grand. But let's say you went to a professional that really understands like all the codes out there. It's not necessarily loopholes, but they're codes, right? And if you don't know how to apply them and when to apply them, then that's when you miss out. And let's say you spent 5 times that. You spent $2,500 on the right CPA, but now you didn't save 20 grand. You saved 40. Hands down. Hands. Hey, even if it was 27, I'd still do it because I still overall net was still far better using a professional that's well versed in this rather than the generic person. As you get deeper into real estate, it's just I don't believe it's wise. That's my opinion.
And that's a good point that you bring up too, because some of the most successful people that I know in real estate, that 8-figure net worths, they're always like, I know what I know, and then I know people in the space that know what I don't know, whether it's like legal counsel, help structuring a deal, accountants, to everything, right? Like they know exactly what they know, and it kind of goes back to that genius zone. And then it's about finding other people that kind of are there to help you in their craft, because they do that day in and day out. Like that's all that they do.
100%. Absolutely, man. And even some of the knowledge you dropped in your course and on some of your spreadsheets was very sharp and astute. And I think that also helps visually formulate the approach and how beneficial it can be. Like paying more for a CPA it doesn't just mean you're just paying more. You might be getting a lot more value too. But of course, you're not obligated to go with anybody. Vet them, talk to them about I think what I did a couple times, I think this is fair to say, take your returns, tell them your maybe even if you have a current P&L or like some kind of current performance of your business or whatever you're doing, even if you're employed, take that to 3 CPAs that you're curious about. Say, here's where I'm at. Here's what my returns did last year. Let me know if you spot any things that we could have done differently and how we would handle it in the future. I think that's a pretty fair thing to do. And some will really, either way, you're going to get educated from 3 different perspectives. If you feel most comfortable with one, go with that person.
Yeah. Yeah, we do. So I've been doing like a lot of sort of value on the front end to kind of position people where I think they'll fit best. So we kind of have kind of what I've been talking to you about is kind of like the DIY model, the do it with you and then the do it for you type, where, if you're just kind of getting started in real estate and you want to learn about tax strategies, but you're not ready to dive right in on the full consulting, I have a course or I have a product for you to self-study, kind of learn on your own, and then come to me with any sort of questions that you have, right? Because again, I can judge somebody's knowledge and expertise by the questions that they ask. And then once you're kind of ready to take that next step, that's where I kind of have the group coaching offer where it's, hey, you go through a much more advanced course. We're going to do templates, the global debt sheet, everything that I need to know about you, and then come to me with your questions that you have. And then if you're actually looking for the sort of the done for you product, that's a higher tier offer, and that's going to require less of your time, but it's going to obviously cost more money. So, and I pride myself in doing a good job of, I understand my consumer and I understand where they're at, and I can best guide them to a specific product, because it's not always, a lot of what the value-based pricing is looking at a consumer and saying, I can put you in the right category because I've dealt with people that have your same exact background.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. I think a lot of people, I mean, every time I talk to you, you share something like pretty profound with me, and I've dealt with quite a few accountants at this point, so it's been really fun to meet you and get to understand like what your knowledge and depth basis is, especially the fact that you're in the STR space and you own them. Like, there's something. Trust me, I've got one accountant, I love them to death, but trying to talk to them about what we're doing in short-term rentals and asking for like write-offs for this versus that, it's just like a wall. I'm like, how do you not see this? This is so commonplace in this industry. That everybody can't be talking out of their ass, right? Mm-hmm. And just not you understanding it. So, like, there can't be like, I can't know 6 CPAs in the STR space that all say this is viable and reasonable, and you say it's not. So, that's why it's good to explore and find something that's the best fit for you. Maybe it's Ryan. So,
where can listeners of the podcast find you?
You can find me in Michigan. If you're looking for more information, you can check out the TikTok or my Instagram, Facebook, whatever. It's all pretty consistent. YouTube, my broker Matt, MYBROKERMATT. If you're interested in coaching or being a part of our new course coming out that's called STR Legend, check it out in our Stan link on Instagram and TikTok.
Awesome, man. Thank you. Cool.
Appreciate it, man. Great job, Ryan. Thank you.